know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gail Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk presents the first important dupe of the Brushy Bill Roberts Billy the Kid imposter hoax. The information is from my book, Cracking the Billy the Kid Imposter Hoax of Brushy Bill Roberts. The November 30th, 1950 failure of Oliver Brushy Bill Roberts to trick New Mexico's Governor T.J. Mayberry into giving him a pardon as Billy the Kid, followed by Brushy's sudden death a month later, left his hoax backers, WilliamVMorrison and C.L. Sonneshin, free to manufacture a better Brushy for a hoax book. Salesman Morrison used English teacher Sonneshin for its writing. Completed by 1952, it still needed a publisher who'd print what historians called a hoax, featuring a man called by Governor Mayberry an imposter. It took time for Morrison to find that person for what became alias Billy the Kid. On April 6, 1955, Morrison announced its publication to a Paul Blazer. He wrote, "The book will be reviewed this month and go on sale on May 1st. Then autographing party is scheduled at White House on May 21st. Also television program in El Paso on KTSM." Brushy's own P.T. Barnum had fulfilled Barnum's maxim, "There's a sucker born every minute." By April 9th, 1956, Morrison was hyping the book to a George J. Hayes. "You may or may not know that Dr. C.L. Sonneshin and I have a book published by the University of New Mexico Press on Billy the Kid. It has been declared by many as the best book on the subject." Though this was wishful hyperbole, their alias Billy the Kid would be the Bible for Brushy believers to the present. The person who plucked the Brushy Bill hoax from deserved disappearance to dissemination was Edward Beverly E.B. Mann, director of the University of New Mexico Press, the dupe landed by Morrison. Seeing himself as a Billy the Kid aficionado, Mann was predisposed to the hoax by having written a 1934 fiction about Billy not being killed by Pat Garrett. So, in 1954, he picked alias Billy the Kid for his academic press. On January 7, 1955, Morrison flattered him, writing, "I certainly enjoyed the visit there, and it was very interesting to learn that you are an enthusiast of the Kid, as well as being an authority on guns." Time didn't wise up E.B. Mann. 26 years after the publication, he still promoted Brushy in his July of 1981 Field and Stream magazine article titled Billy the Kid. It reveals the impenetrable ignorance that got him fooled. It's also a window into the mind of subsequent dupes. Impressed by the tale, unaware of its fatal errors, they accepted its fictions and shunned history books as conspiring against its truth. Excerpted, E.B. Mann, echoing Morrison and Sonneshan, wrote, Billy the Kid, call him Bonnie, McCarty, Antrim, or whatever, was nothing more than a teenage boy dragged into a range war by an angry loyalty to his friends. Let me offer less-known facts of the legend, which, in a long lifetime of gunfighter research, have brought me into contact with the legend. I once wrote a novel titled Gambling Man. In my book, Billy was not killed by Pat Garrett that fateful night in Pete Maxwell's house in Fort Sumner, and there are many people, some of them descendants of old-time New Mexicans who participated in the war, who think that my guess was right. In 1950, a little man, known in Texas as Brushy Bill Roberts, 91 years old, confessed that he was Billy the Kid and appealed to the governor of New Mexico, Thomas Mabry, for pardon for crimes charged against him under that name. Said Brushy Bill, I want to die a free man. On November 29, 1950, note that it was November 30th, I was one of the 50 or more avid witnesses in the governor's mansion when Brushy Bill and his attorney, note that Mann still thought imposter Morrison was an attorney, appeared to plead their case. The little man was sick and scared. Small wonder that he was scared, confronted as he was by Pat Garrett's lowering sons, Oscar and Jarvis, by clusters of state and local police, by yammering newsmen and flashing cameras. He denied knowledge of or gave wrong answers to the questions fired at him. The news media made a joke of it, and Governor Mabry denied action on the petition for pardon, quote, because I do not believe this man is Billy the Kid. No one could have believed it based on the little man's performance, but that was only the beginning of my connection with the Brushy Bill story. In 1954, as director of the University of New Mexico Press, I received a manuscript detailing and documenting that story. Dr. C.L. Sonneshan, one of the authors, was a respected historian. Note that Mann hid that actual historians called Brushy's tale a hoax. The other, WilliamVMorrison, was a successful Texas attorney and a veteran student of Western legends. They came with documents they had unearthed, with sheaves of correspondence from many sources, and with literally miles of tape recordings of their discussions with Brushy Bill Roberts. Note that this was Morrison's Billy the Kid research and his tape-recorded prompt sessions with Brushy. I was sure then, and I'm sure now, that no researchers ever dug deeper into the Billy the Kid story than did Sonneshan and Morrison. Note that this claim is preposterous, given real scholarly research by this 1981 date, but it reflects Morrison's scam of his so-called evidence packet brought to the Mabry hearing with its pardon petition claim. We are sure that the great amount of work and effort reflected by the enclosed file is readily apparent. Mann proved con artist Morrison had bet correctly. With the right dupe, any pile of Billy the Kid documents did the trick. Morrison had merely underestimated the savvy of Mabry and his experts. That evidence packet is exposed in Talk 54, linked below. Mann continued. The book, alias Billy the Kid, was published in 1955. It is an engrossing story whether you choose to believe it or not. Certainly, the Brushy Bill of the tapes was a very different witness than the little man in the governor's mansion. His memory of names, dates, and events was remarkable, guiding the researchers to proofs of facts never before known and to documented records refuting facts previously accepted by all of the experts. Note that man was tricked by the Hoax'S special knowledge scam. He was too historically ignorant to recognize Brushy's prompt errors, giving away his sources, or that no facts, never before known, were provided. Man continued. He was the right size, had large wrists and small hands, the better to escape from handcuffs, and he had a not impossible story of his life after his escape from New Mexico. He knew things that made one wonder. As Morrison, it was Sonation, put it, "If he wasn't Billy the Kid, who was he?" How did Brushy Bill explain that escape? What happened that night he was supposedly killed? He said that another boy about his size was killed that night, and that Garrett, Pete Maxwell, Tia Delavina, and the six-man coroner's jury misidentified the body. Garrett to get the reward, the others, quote, "to give me a chance to get away." Brushy Bill made it all seem plausible, though Morrison and Sonation could not find a trace of the man Brushy Bill said was killed. But it was true that neither of the deputies with Garrett that night had ever seen Billy. It was true that Pete Maxwell was Billy's friend and that Tia Delavina loved him like a mother. Note that Manson omits the 200 townspeople who identified Billy's body at his wake. It was true, too, that every man on the jury was Spanish. Man was unaware that its president was non-Spanish Milner Rudolph, a Santa Fe ringite who could identify Billy and would have welcomed anti-ring Billy's killing, and that Billy the Kid was a folk hero among Spanish people. Note that this is man's own fakery to deny the coroner's jury report. Another mystery is Billy's name. Some insist that his real name was McCarty. Others say that his name was Antrim, though the date of the McCarty-Antrim marriage makes that seem somewhat unlikely. Still, others say his name was William H. Bonney, born in New York City November 23rd or 29th, 1859. Note that man made up 29th. A son of an earlier marriage or non-marriage to Catherine, in parenthesis, Catherine, Kathleen, spelled with K, not C. Note that man slipped in Brushy's faked, misspelled names for her. Note that there was no name mystery. Man hid the 1873 Santa Fe marriage certificate of Billy's mother, Catherine McCarty, listing him as Henry McCarty, a witness to her marrying William Henry Harrison Antrim. Certain it is, though, that Bonnie was the name Billy bore in New Mexico. Man is unaware Bonnie was an alias. Self-proclaimed gun expert man then describes the tintype, erroneously calling its Winchester .73 carbine a rifle. Man continued, "That picture has often been printed in reverse." He is unaware that tintypes are in reverse, resulting in a mirror image which makes the boy from the position of the revolver on his left hip appear to be left-handed. Never mind that Brushy Bill Roberts said he was left-handed by preference, but shot equally well with either hand. Note that this was Morrison's better Brushy fix-up to ambidextrousness, and real Brushy was right-handed. Man's mangled history followed. The Lincoln County Troubles are called a competition between, quote, Alexander McSween, leaving out actual John Tunstall, who opened a general store in competition with the Murphy Dolan business. Used is Brushy's tale that Billy, quote, worked for Chisholm, for Pete Maxwell, and finally for Tunstall. Tunstall is murdered for no reason by, quote, a drunken crew of killers that made Billy seek revenge. Morton and Baker are killed by Brewer's posse and, quote, were turned face down over their saddles. They were actually buried where killed. Man continued. So was war, with politicians in Santa Fe calling the shots and naming the winners. Man made up that, quote, Billy the Kid was, by common consent, the war chief of that faction. Man further made up that Billy was a bad leader, as proved by Pepin surrounding the McSween house in Lincoln, filled with his partisans. Note that Man seems unaware that McSween led the anti-Ring faction, or that Commander Dudley's intervention enabled besieging of McSween's house. Man stated, at one point in the days-long battle, a column of U.S. cavalrymen under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Dudley, 3 captains, and several lieutenants marched into Lincoln from Fort Stanton. Man was unaware of infantrymen also. Man denies that the troops intervened, unaware that Dudley threatened McSween's men into fleeing. Man has McSween's house set on fire, with some inside fleeing and others killed, including McSween. Man continued. Billy was the last through that kitchen door. He moved swiftly, picking his way around and over the bodies, a gun blazing in either hand. Billy dived over the back wall into the bushes. Note that Man didn't know that only Harvey Morris was killed in that escape, or that 3 white soldiers fired at them, or that the escape was across the Bonita River, or that McSween was killed after the escape. Man states that this fight made Billy an outlaw. He continued, Pat Garrett asked for and got the job of hunting them down. Note that the escape was on July 19, 1878. Garrett wasn't elected sheriff until 2 years later, in November of 1880. Man continued that Governor Lew Wallace offered amnesty to everyone who would, quote, go straight. He even carried that offer to Billy in person. Billy said, quote, if I laid down my guns, they'd kill me before I could get out of town. Wallace said, if you believe that, I'll give you safe conduct out of the territory. Billy said, I have as much right here as they do. I won't run. This is Man's own fake pardon deal. It's not Brushy's or reality. Man then made up a chase by Garrett's posse in which Tom O'Folliard is killed, Tom Pickett is wounded, and the rest chased to Stinking Springs. There, Man said Charlie Bowdry was killed and made up a 2-day siege before surrender. Actually, Billy, Dave Rudabout, Tom Pickett, and Billy Wilson surrendered the same December 22nd, 1880, as Bowdry's killing. And O'Folliard was killed on the 19th, and Pickett was not wounded. Man continues with Billy tried for the Brady murder, of which he is guilty, though others were too. Brady and his men had shot at them, wounding Billy's hip to avenge the death of his deputies, Morton and Baker. Man, like Brushy, was unaware of the actual regulator ambush, so used Brushy's made-up shootout with Brady. Man added Billy's thigh wound, though ignorant that it came after the ambush while he was retrieving his carbine from Brady's body. Man made up that Brady was avenging Morton and Baker's killing because he was unaware that the regulators' ambush was to save Alexander McSween from murder by Brady. Billy is placed in a cell in the Lincoln County Courthouse, guarded by Bell and Ollinger. Note that Man didn't know that there was no cell. Billy was just chained to a floor ring in a second-floor room. When Garrett was out of town, Billy slipped, quote, his slim hands out of his cuffs and snatched Bell's revolver. Note that man uses Brushy's slipping handcuffs fiction lifted from Lew Wallace's Outlaw Myth articles. Man continued. He ordered Bell to lead the way to the armory, but Bell ran down the stairs and Billy shot him. Then Billy shot returning Ollinger with Ollinger's shotgun. Man then has Garrett seeking Billy in Fort Sumner with 2 deputies and going to Peter Maxwell's house to question him, with Billy going to Delavina's house to eat and her sending him to Maxwell's to get beef hung on a side porch. Man made up this Delavina tale. It wasn't in Brushy's hoax. When Billy entered Maxwell's room, Garrett shot him. Note that Man gave the conventional death scene instead of Brushy's book's back porch killing. Billy was identified by Delavina, Peter Maxwell, and Garrett. Garrett also identified Billy's so-called self-cocker. Man questioned that revolver since Billy used single actions and the room was dark. Note that this gunned out, made up by Morrison, didn't make it into Alias Billy the Kid. Morrison had made up that Garrett's lying about the gun meant he lied about the body's identity. Proved is that both Morrison and self-proclaimed firearms expert Man didn't know that someone on the run like Billy might reasonably carry the relatively small but 6-shot double-action Colt 41 as a hideaway weapon. Also, Garrett identified the gun not in the dark, but in the subsequently lit room. Man makes up that the coroner's jury accepted, quote, the identification of the body. In fact, they identified Billy and quoted Peter Maxwell's eyewitness identification of Billy. Man made up that the report was, quote, Garrett's claim for the bounty. Man was faking Garrett's making a fake coroner's jury report, though, in fact, he had no part in its writing. Delavina Maxwell is claimed as faking the body as Billy's because, quote, we wanted to give Billy time to get away. Man made up this quote. In fact, for 40 years, Delavina laid wildflowers on Billy's Fort Sumner grave because he was there and dead. Man ended by claiming meaningless hearsay by an unnamed, quote, direct descendant of an unnamed juryman who refused to say if Billy was the body. Man concluded, so you decide for yourself. Either way, it's a great story, and either way, it could be true. This is the level of ignorance and credulity needed to accept the hoax. E.B. Man led the line. The 1955 print run for Alias Billy the Kid was 3,000 books. In 1956, the year after its publication, E.B. Man was fired as director of the University of New Mexico Press and replaced by a Roland Dickey. This was announced in a June 14, 1956 Albuquerque Journal article, UNM to combine 3 publications under one head. It stated, the press will discharge 8 to 10 of the present publication's employees, including E.B. Man, director of the University Press, since 1949. It's unclear if Alias Billy the Kid led to Man's ousting, but he turned to none other than WilliamVMorrison to help. Morrison, reminiscing to Sonneshin in a December 11, 1976 letter, stated, I received Man's letter that his position as director had been terminated. He asked me to keep a lookout for a job in my trips. As to Man's employment, September 8, 1956's Albuquerque Journal reported under magazine editor that he became managing editor of Guns Magazine and Guns Merchandise Magazine. It praised him as contributing to literature on firearms and is the author of numerous Western novels. By 1976, the University of New Mexico Press chose not to reprint Alias Billy the Kid. Morrison, in a December 11, 1976 letter to Sanderson, made up a conspiracy theory. He wrote, "Perhaps there is more than meets the eye in the sudden demise of Alias and firing of Mr. Man by the press." Morrison informed Sanderson that he hadn't told him that the Garrett faction and Oscar Garrett had threatened a lawsuit if they published Alias Billy the Kid, but Oscar had died, ending it. Morrison also groused that historian William Kelleher had ignored his warning that the coroner's verdict was invalid, meaning the coroner's jury report, and had published it in his 1957 book, Violence in Lincoln County. So Morrison added Kelleher to the conspiracy. 3 days later, on December 14th, Revved Up Morrison wrote a long but futile letter to the University of New Mexico Press's rights and permissions person, blaming the so-called Garrett faction for changing Governor Mabry's mind about pardoning Brushy, blaming, quote, undercurrents of politics exercised by the old Santa Fe ring, and blaming William Kelleher for not researching the coroner's jury report and Garrett's reward. He hinted at blaming the press, too. He wrote, "Roberts died a natural death. I hope Alias's death was from natural causes without any interference from the ring." On March 28, 1977, Morrison, on behalf of himself and Sanderson, followed up this conspiracy theory letter and challenged the University of New Mexico Press to reprint Alias Billy the Kid. On June 3, 1977, its new director, Hugh W. Treadwell, rejected his request. On September 5, 1977, Sanderson, as usual pretending to be neutral and blaming Morrison, wrote to Treadwell, informing him that Morrison had died that August 30th. He added, "As you may have guessed, Morrison was the one who was ambitious for a republication of Alias. I do not intend to press the matter myself. I have no doubt that someday somebody will want to reprint the book." So, 22 years after its publication, Sanderson was confident that there'd be more dupes queued behind E.B. Man. The talks to follow debunk Sanderson's and Morrison's Alias Billy the Kid.